In Noah's Wife, I didn't know until the book was three-quarters of the way done. About three-quarters of the way, it's revealed who did it, and it was a surprise to me, too. And that's one of the joys about writing, is that you don't always know what's going to happen.
This is The Book of Life. I'm Heidi Rabinowitz. I really enjoyed T.K. Thorne's two biblical novels, Noah's Wife and Angels at the Gate, which is about Lot's wife. So I was very happy to meet T.K. at the 2016 Association of Jewish Libraries conference in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm sure you will be as charmed by her as I was. TK, could you just summarize your two biblical stories briefly?
Sure. My first book was Noah's Wife, and it is during the time of the flood. A friend was talking about her minister had told her that Noah's wife only got one line in the Bible, and that ticked her off. And she wrote a poem about it, and I thought, oh my goodness, somebody has to tell this story. So I started researching the facts behind the flood and picked a time period that actually happened and wrote a book. And the next book was Angels at the Gate, which is the story of Lot's wife, the lady who turned and looked back and turned into salt, according to the biblical story. Both of these stories are a large part of my imagination. I try to follow the biblical text and the history of the time, but they are not religious books as such. They're historical fiction.
Okay, great. So there's often a tension in historical fiction about the role of women in that time period versus our modern sensibility of women. So what kind of challenge did that pose for you, and how did you deal with that?
Well, first of all, my character in Noah's Wife is Naamah, which is a traditional Jewish name. And right away I realized that this was a different young lady. And her perspective was different from that of the time period. And it turned out it was because she had something called Asperger's syndrome, which I didn't set out trying to give her. She just had it, and I diagnosed her. And I decided just to go with it because that was so strongly who she was. So her perspective is different from most women, or most people, really. I say she didn't drink the Kool-Aid of the time because she only believed in what she could see or experience personally. With Lot's wife, whose name is Adira, her personality came out very strongly from the beginning also. She was raised as a boy. So her book is partly about her journey to discover who she was as a woman. And she also had a different perspective, having grown up being treated as a boy in the culture. And so she had experienced a lot more freedoms. And when she suddenly realized that as a woman, she was not as free and what those constraints were, it was difficult for her. I think it's difficult for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Those are two creative ways to get around the restrictions of the time period. It's hard to have any adventures with a character who's never allowed to leave the house.
Right.
So, So there are certain themes that I noticed running through both books. These were some themes that I wouldn't have expected to find necessarily in biblical historical fiction. So I'd like you to give some insight on why these themes are important to you. Things that I noticed were faithful companion animals, sex as a religious ritual, rape and incest. So why are those things that keep turning up in your writing?
An interesting question. Well, first of all, the animal in Noah's Wife was a bird, and this was taken from the dove. Only this animal was really a white parrot. And I thought that was a fun twist and also gave me the opportunity to have it be a little more intelligent creature than a dove. In Angels at the Gate, I deliberately chose a dog. Dogs in the Middle East were and are normally considered sort of scavenger creatures. However, the kind of dog that is in this story was one of the oldest breeds in the world, a breed that was highly thought of as a companion animal and a hunter dog, Saluki. So why? Maybe because animals play an important part in my life.
Do you have a faithful companion animal of your own?
I've had many faithful companion animals, and I have two right now, two dogs and a cat. I don't know if the cat's a real companion, although I've played with the cat as a character. To me, they're just as real as people and important in our lives.
Okay.
And they're fun to write about.
Yeah.
There's also another thing that Nami, the dog, plays. In fact, her name is a shortened form of Naomi. And I think the dog actually taught Adira a lot of things, and one of those is faithfulness and what true friendship means, things that she needed to learn. The dog helped her learn those things. And the same thing, believe it or not, for the parrot.
Okay, and so these other themes, do you have anything to comment?
Let's go with sex as a religious. That's because it was during that time period. Pre-Hebrew, the religion was of the fertility goddess. And when I did a lot of research about early religions, that happened over and over again. So that was a reflection of the times. And also, I think it's something that kind of shocks us a little bit now, and wanted to let the reader know that this was the way it was. You know.
Okay. Rape and incest occurred in both books, and that surprised me.
In Angels at the Gate, the incest of Lot and his daughters is in the biblical text. The only thing that I did was give it a little twist as to when it happened. But it definitely happened in the biblical text, and so I used it. In Noah's Wife, I didn't know that it was incest until the book was 3/4 of the way done. About 3/4 of the way, it's revealed who did it, and it was a surprise to me too. And that's one of the joys about writing from a character and building organically a story, is that you don't always know what's going to happen.
Huh. That's interesting.
So it was a major twist in the story, which you've now revealed, by the way.
So both books explore the backstory of the protagonists, and the famous parts, like the flood and the destruction of Sodom, are almost an afterthought. So why did you choose to shift the emphasis like that?
Because I wanted to. These are works of fiction, and I wanted to explore more the character and the times than I wanted to tell a, quote, biblical story, end quote.
So some readers might expect to encounter a patriarchal God in novels based on the Bible. But here we encounter polytheism, goddess worship, agnosticism.
Well, first of all, I'm Jewish, and I grew up with the story of Abraham having a sudden realization that God was not an idol. From that, you have to know that prior to that realization, people thought that the idols were gods. And so, like I said, this book is an attempt to set it in a true, as much as we can, historical time period. And also, the feminine was worshipped long before the Hebrew tribes started worshiping a patriarchal God. In fact, the archaeology supports the fact that for a long time, up until the mid-first millennium BCE, the Hebrews themselves had polytheistic worship, and they were finding idols in the homes, and particularly the Asherah, who was the goddess of the Canaanites, or one of the main goddesses in the fertility worship. And so this is just what I found in my research, and I incorporated it in the story as I thought it might have really been.
Would you characterize these books as chick lit, and have you had any different kind of response from male versus female readers?
I have found to my surprise that men enjoy the story as much as women. Maybe they have to hide it. I don't know. I've had very different reactions. I actually had a female friend tell me that she had Noah's Wife on the bedside table, and her boyfriend picked it up and read it and proposed to her.
Wow. Mm-hmm. What was it about the book that made him do that?
He had lost his first wife, and I believe he had carried inside of him the feeling or the belief that he could never love again. And somehow this story opened his eyes to the fact that opening your heart to another person doesn't mean not loving the first one.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's what I said, wow.
That is so cool. So can you talk a little bit about your research? How did you go about it? Did you learn anything that surprised you as you were doing your research?
All kinds of things. First of all, the whole concept we talked about early religion having a strong feminine component to it, and even early Hebrew religion has a strong feminine component to it that has been suppressed over the years. That was a surprise to me. I had no idea. I was fortunate enough to get to go to Turkey and to Israel for both of these books. And I learned an awful lot about the desert that I had no idea about growing up in Alabama, in case you can't tell from my accent. I'd had very little experience with deserts. It wasn't what I expected. I guess I had a mental image of sand, as we think of the Sahara and so forth. But the Negev is a hard pan desert, much like our western in the United States. And the creatures... One time I was talking to a young Bedouin man, and he was telling me about how there is a parasite that exists in the desert. And if it bites you in the wrong place, you will have lifelong problems. And so what they do is they wrap their babies in swaddling, except for a little exposed part on the buttocks. And they put them under this particular tree where these things happen to live. And it's like a vaccine. So the parasite gets in that one spot, and once it's in that spot, it doesn't spread anywhere else.
Huh.
And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not something I had read in any book or anywhere, but getting to talk to this person whose generations have lived in the desert, to know it that well, was fascinating.
Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about that I have not thought to ask you?
Just that I would never have envisioned myself writing biblical character stories. Personally, I'm a humanistic Jew, and so it's been difficult to market these books because they don't fit in any category. I like to think I don't either. But that's been the biggest challenge, and it's a combination of so many things. Is it chick lit? Is it women's fiction? Is it adventure story? Is it for biblical scholars? Is it love stories? All of that is in the books.
Are you going to write another?
I have no idea. My publisher wants me to write a sequel to Angels. I may end up doing that. I'm working on a historical book right now.
Historical fiction or historical
nonfiction? Historical
Mm-hmm.
Nonfiction, set in Birmingham during the Civil Rights era. I have one book that is nonfiction that is about the 16th Street church bombing case, the investigators. I was a police officer in Birmingham for a career and had the opportunity to have interviews with the investigators. That case spans 4 decades. It was an incredible experience. And I'm finding writing this new historical book has also been an incredible learning experience. It's amazing how much I don't know. I've also got what I call my fun book, which is the story of a rookie police detective who discovers she's a witch.
Wow, you're all over the map.
I'm all over the map. So I'm trying to answer your question.
Yeah, all right.
So I may get back to another biblical story. And then who knows where I may go.
Yeah, well, keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks so much for speaking with me.
My pleasure.
If you enjoy the Book of Life podcast, please become a patron at patreon.com/bookoflife. Leave a review on iTunes or a comment on our blog at bookoflifepodcast.com. You can also like our page at facebook.com/bookoflifepodcast. Follow us at twitter.com/bookoflifepod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band. Thanks for listening and happy reading.